This
Good afternoon.
conference will now be recorded.
Well, all right, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome back, I should say, to House and Home. Really grateful you decided to spend some time with us today. We are in session 5 of our first series, Predictably Unpredictable. This week, we're talking about the socially distanced chapter house, and it's been a hot topic that a lot of folks have asked questions about over the summer, and we're excited to have a great session planned for you today. So for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to meet, my name is Scott Fusel. I'm the Director of Education for CSL Management. I'm also the host of House and Home, and I had an absolutely life-changing experience, life-changing fraternity experience as a member of Beta Theta Pi at Middle Tennessee State. And I will tell you, the fraternity continues to change my life on pretty much a daily basis because I get to meet and work with great people like you. And some of my best friends continue to be the people that I have met through fraternity. And so really blessed to be a part of this community, and I'm grateful that you guys decided to spend some time with us today. With me, as always, is Christina Kinzer. She's one of our senior operations specialists here at CSL, and she is always serving as our chat manager. We'll be fielding all of your questions through the chat feature in your control panel. So if you have a question along the way, somebody says something you want a little clarification on, or maybe we didn't hit a topic as thoroughly as you'd like for us to, please hop in that chat feature. And at the end of the session, once we've gone through all the content, we will have some time left over for questions and answers a little bit later. So again, hop in that chat feature, log your questions there, and Christina will help us walk through those at the end of our session. So as always, I want to begin with a quick thank you again. And you do this every single week by showing up. You're showing us and you're revealing to us how much you care for this community, how much you care for fraternity and sorority, and how much you care about these facilities and the members who call them home. So what that reveals to us is you're deeply committed to this community and everything that we're trying to achieve. So know that we're extraordinarily grateful for the time that you're spending with us today, all the work that you have done in the past, and everything you're doing to help us get ready for this fall. So thank you, thank you, thank you for, again, being with us this week. So let's talk a little bit about what you can expect today. First off, we're going to talk about some changes and some points of emphasis that you'll see in the kitchen area. And we're also going to talk about some opportunities to increase the safety in terms of the service, the way food will be delivered, and some of the seating that you're going to see in your dining rooms. And then we're going to dive into some more of the common areas of the facility and talk about ways that we can maximize health and safety in some of the areas that are high traffic areas, or even the bedroom spaces. So those are the topics we're going to hit on today. It's a lot to cover, and we're going to do the best we can to manage all of that in about 53 minutes. So as always, we want you leaving these sessions feeling connected and confident and compelled. We want you to feel like this information is relevant, and that you're reminded that you're not in this alone. We have a wonderful community of people, and none of us have ever managed fraternity and sorority housing in the middle of a pandemic before. So it's really important that we lean on each other, we learn from each other, and that we really keep in mind that horseshoes are greater than circles. So there's always room here. So if you have a friend that could benefit from these sessions or could contribute to them, please bring them in. There's always space here, and it's important that we remember that we continue to bring people into our community here, and then we continue to learn from each other. So again, if you leave here with 4 or 5 tips that enable you to feel more ready than you did when you showed up, then that is a win for all of us. So the topic today is this whole thing around social distancing. So I do want to start with a quick reminder that, and this has been my challenge since COVID sort of really took hold in our culture and our community, is I really struggle with the term social distancing. So because I think it oftentimes is misconstrued. I loved it when people started saying physical distancing as opposed to social distancing, because we're not trying to get people to socially distance, because that would imply that we almost want you to separate yourself from people. And a lot of what we're asking people to do right now, we're asking humans to do something that's pretty inhumane. We are built for friendship. We are built for connectivity. We are built for community. And we are struggling sometimes to manage the relational side of that while we're asking people to social or physically distance. So what I want to remind each of us is that while we're trying to create spaces that are safe and healthy along the way, we also have to do so with some intentionality around never losing sight of the fact that we still have to be creating spaces and facilities that nurture connectivity and nurture family, because that's what we're all about. So I do want to offer up that reminder because I think it's an important differentiator to make. Social distancing does not equal relational distancing. So I think it's important for us to keep that in mind. So here's where I need to ask you a question. I would love for you to hop in the chat feature here in a second. I want to know your confidence level on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being I'm supremely confident. I want to know what you think the chances are of your students that you support observing any kind of social distancing on campus or within the facility. If you are super confident that our students are going to observe social distancing in our chapter houses, then I want you to pop a 10 into the chat box. If you think there's no way in hell it's going to happen, give us a 1 in there. Let's see what people have to say. My gosh, you guys are chiming in quickly. Let's see. The responses last night were pretty all over the board with varying degrees of confidence, we'll say. Seeing some 5s, some 2s. There's 1 8. That is really optimistic. I love that. A lot of 2s and some 4s. Yeah, we're seeing everything. The majority of the answers look like they're anywhere from 5 and below. So I appreciate you guys hopping in over there. That's really helpful to kind of help us guide the conversation. So what we would love for you to do today is if we can get you from a 2 to a 3, or maybe a 4 to a 6, or maybe a 7 to a 9, well, that's a big win, because we know that, and we've talked about this every week, that we have to engage the students in this process, and we've got to have their ownership and their buy-in to this whole new environment we're trying to manage and create for them. So if we can help raise your confidence level by giving you some tools and tactics to help make to generate more awareness and to promote and encourage social distancing, then they are much more likely to follow along. So I'm hopeful that we can raise your confidence level during this session simply by giving you a few tools that you may not have considered prior to. So that being said, a disclaimer to go along with our reminder I shared earlier is we're going to be talking about some ideal scenarios today. We know that every single chapter house is created differently. So what we talk about in some of the chapter houses and some of the layouts that we described today may not look at all like your facility, but they're going to be bits and pieces of what our speakers share with you today that you can apply to your facility. So I know that the chasm between ideal and reality can be a wide one. We just want to help bring that together and make that more of a fine line versus a chasm. So did want to offer you up that disclaimer. That being said, let's introduce our 2 speakers today. I'm so excited to have 2 great friends of mine join us today. Liz Toombs and Jack Dawson are going to be with us today. For many of you have probably worked with Liz. She is the owner and lead decorator at PDR Interiors and has been a great friend to CSL and does an incredible job of supporting our clients and others all across the country. And she's going to bring a really unique expertise in terms of what she's had to kind of undo some of the things that she's tried to do and support earlier in the past few years with the clients that she supported. So we're going to be hearing from her a little bit later. Liz, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate you making some time. And Jack Dawson, who is the owner and president of College Fresh, also a longtime partner of CSL, and his team does an incredible job of serving our kitchens and dining rooms all across the country. So he's going to be talking really about what's happening behind the scenes, helping you better understand what has been going on in the kitchen and how that's going to translate to how we serve and how we prepare, serve, and seat our students in our dining facilities. So we have 2 incredible speakers today. We're really thankful that they decided to spend some time with us and eager to hear what they have to share. So Jack, let's start with you. Tell us about your summer. How has this looked different from previous years, and what are you going to do? What guidance can you give us in terms of safe service seating and safe exiting these facilities? Talk to us a little bit about what the summers look like for your team.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think the biggest difference is we're not traveling as much. This is usually our time of year that we're traveling all over the country. visiting with new partners, old partners, new chefs, staff, but we're stuck at home for the most part. But really today we're going to be focusing on safety in our operations, safety for the students, and peace of mind for the parents. So safe service, safe seating, and safe exit. Those are going to be our focal points today. We know that as we go through this, there are going to be 1,000 different triggers and bells ringing for each of you as you think about your chapter and your organization's food services for this fall. We think it's highly unlikely we're going to be able to cover all of your main concerns today, but we're certainly going to try. If any of you have any specific questions, feel free to chime into the chat box. As Scott said, I know that him and Christina and Megan are going to monitor those. Also, Megan will drop our contact information in there a couple times throughout the presentation. If you really want to dig down into what your services are going to look like, whether or not we're a partner, we're happy to share information, give advice, give some talking points for you and your team so that you can really take some good tangible takeaways from this call. So I think, Scott, let's jump over to the safe services. Before we get into the physical distancing aspect, which will be our main focal point, we think there's several items that need to be considered before we even think about members coming in to the chapter house. We've said it all along this summer is that when it comes to cleaning and sanitizing, the actual tasks your kitchen staff are going to be doing will not be changing. What is really going to be changing, what needs to be changing, is the frequency and the visibility with which those items are being done. We're talking hourly and daily checklists for your staff to make sure that the students are comfortable eating in the dining room. Make sure that the parents are comfortable checking in, seeing that, yes, this dining room has been cleaned every other hour as we go through these lunch and dinner services. So if you haven't had that process in place, whether or not you're with College Fresh, one of our talented competitors, or if you're managing this on your own, please make sure that you talk to your team about having those policies in place. You're going to see the idea of tiered or slotted meal times throughout this presentation as well. That is going to come into play when we start talking about capacity. We think that's one great tool to help all of your chapters make sure that you're able to get students to the chapter house, for that still to be a part of the culture, but to do so safely. We are going to preach on as many services without the members touching tongs, spoons, utensils, drink machines as possible. For the most part, across the country, health departments are saying, you can do buffets, you can do a hotline, you can do a cold line, but the students cannot do the self-serve like they're used to. The idea being that a student that could be infected could touch a spoon, could touch tongs, then someone could come in right behind him and use those same utensils. We're happy to know that they're reporting that it's less likely for the virus to be spread that way, but it's still something that health departments are taking into account. The same goes for drink services and snacks as well. So when we're thinking about what services look like while using the hotline and cold line, the salad bar, which is a huge part of service for members, we want them to be picturing something like the Chipotle setup, or even Panda Express, for those of you familiar with that, where you can still see all the good, fresh options in front of the members, but then you've got your staff behind the line with masks and gloves serving those items safely. Another main point we want everyone to take away from this call is that your kitchen staff should be doing daily temperature and health screenings. We see this as a non-conversation starter, that there's going to be no room for conversation here, that we have to be doing this on a daily basis. As we talked about earlier, the frequency and visibility, your staff needs to be taking record of this on a daily basis. So before they even get started, I believe all of our competitors are doing something similar, but we're going to be purchasing the digital forehead thermometers for every kitchen we're operating in. Going to have extras because they're going to break too, so that's another thing you should probably think about. But before the staff even gets started, they're going to take their temperatures and they're going to answer a minimum of 3 questions. Have you been in contact with anyone who's been confirmed positive? Have you traveled to any confirmed hotspots? And have you exhibited any of the following symptoms? And if the answer to any of those questions is yes, then that employee is not going to be able to come to work today. In food service, it has always been important for chefs and kitchen staff to stay home when sick. This year, we don't mind saying it, it's more important than ever. So that's another thing we'll talk about a little later, is what policies and procedures do you have in place when inevitably your staff is unable to come in and work in the kitchen? We're going to talk about the need for additional hand sanitizing stations, especially when we talk about those areas where we do want the members to have the ability to self-serve. A lot of the public health departments we're working with are recommending to have the use of gloves and additional hand sanitizing stations available. If you haven't had those conversations with your food service provider, with your kitchen staff, please do so as soon as possible. For a lot of those important items like the hand sanitizer station, the gel, sprays, wipes, you could see anywhere from a 4 to a 6 week lead time. We still have purveyors saying that they can help us out in this regard, but that won't be true in terms of getting things stocked up before the semester for too much longer. So you're going to want to have those conversations sooner than later. And finally, we want everyone on the call to make sure they have educational tools in place for the students. We had the fortune, I should say, of serving a lot of chapters this last spring when the COVID shutdowns came about. For one reason or another, there were groups of students and house directors that couldn't travel. And when we had to change services on a dime, go from the full service, lots of options, hot bar, salad bar, snacks, drinks, to having things served in the one-time use disposable to-go box, naturally, some students are going to be frustrated. They're in their home. Why can't we have the meals that we're used to? We're paying for it, right? We found that by educating them on why certain decisions were being made, to have them involved in the process, the conversations about why decisions are being made, that led to a lot less frustration on the members' part, a lot more buy-in on their part. You know, Scott asked a great question is, what do we think the chances are that these students follow these guidelines? We don't know the answer, but we do believe that by actively communicating with them and partnering with them, we can increase that number for each of you. So just a couple of things we want to talk about before we even get into the physical distancing, because without these, we don't think physical distancing is going to matter all that much. So now here, what we wanted to do was show you all a couple layouts of some of our partners that we work with across the country. You're going to see this recommended capacity bullet point on a few of these. And I think we'll start off by touching base on this. Very early on in this process, our team, just like CSLs and everyone else, we were inundating ourselves with webinars, and our training and development team was all listening into a webinar put on by the Disney Corporation, a group that a lot of people in our industry see as experts in terms of feeding large groups of people. And what we took away from that, the main point was this 36 number rule, where for any of your dining rooms, you take the square footage and you divide that by 36, which is the 6 foot physical distancing recommendation squared. And when you take that, you're going to come up with a number that would be your recommended capacity for your dining room. It's a very easy rule to follow. It's great in terms of putting policies in place and making recommendations that are clear and simple that you should be able to get some buy-in from your members on. Okay, so we'll touch a little bit more on the capacity later, especially when we talk about live outs. But Scott, if you could just go through the flow now. We wanted to say that ideally, and we know it's not always ideal, but ideally in these situations, you have the ability to have one entry and one exit for your chapters. Megan, I'm gonna have to pause this for 1 second. If you could talk a little bit on a few of these points, please.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Jack has his daughter, so he's got to go tend to her really quickly. So recommended capacity entering the dining room. We've got in the foyer, we measure that as an 8-person max. So you can walk through the foyer, they can line up accordingly, and then they come into the dining area. The red area right there is the buffet and salad bar. So what they would do is our staff or our competitors, if anybody's with one of our competitors, they will plate the food and then place it on the pink table.
Hey, sorry about that.
No, that's right. We're at the food service table, the food service provider plating the food and placing them on the food service table for the member to pick.
Yeah, so we're talking a little bit about entry and exit as that relates to flow. In this situation, we'd say ideally there's one entry, maybe that foyer, and then maybe one exit down in the bottom left corner there. In this chapter, that's just not a reality. As to get to the rest of the house, they have to go through that foyer. So as Scott mentioned earlier, it's just not always possible to go with the ideal situation, but there are some steps we can make to make sure that the students are still being as safe as possible. So as Megan was talking about, we want to make sure that we have those line markers available for the chapters as well. And where we always recommend the starting point is where the start of service is. So that bottom right corner of that hot food and that salad bar line there, Scott, with the red box, that's where we'd start. And we ideally want to make those recommended 6-foot spacing markers from behind that for the students to line up safely. As they come through the line, in this situation, the staff will greet them, mask, gloves on, following all best practices, get the options they need. Get to this line. This one, we're very fortunate in that the drink station you'll see there, that blue box in the upper left-hand corner, it's very workable for the chef to do the hot food and the drinks as the students come through the line. Keep in mind that there are going to be a lot of situations where that's not a possibility. So be thinking a little bit about what the drink service looks like for you all. Ideally, you're able to do that in a way that doesn't add a lot of extra waiting time for the students. So there's some ideas regarding putting together, maybe you've got 15 iced teas, 15 sassy waters, 15 lemonades that would be put on a table for the students to grab and go, maybe to avoid some of that blockage. But there are a lot of creative ideas. There's the individual drinks, those are going to cost you a little bit more, but those can also work. So after we come through the line, the students are you want to make sure there's a clear flow indicated for the students in terms of the seating area. Now, Liz is going to touch base on some of those recommended seating layouts, so I'm not going to dive too much into that. But when the students are done, you'll see a couple black boxes here in each of these layouts. This one will indicate the bus tubs, where we really want to minimize the interaction between the students and staff. For those of you that have the really nice dish setups, in this specific example, there's not an easy dish window to get to, so we always use the bus tubs. But a lot of chapters we work with have those really nice dish windows. We're recommending you look at plexiglass screens for those windows that have a cutout for the dishes to go. Again, the idea is minimizing the students and the staff interacting together. We recommend that the bus tubs be placed in front of each of the exits if possible, as well as those hand sanitizing stations that the students can use before they leave. So we're going to talk just for one more minute regarding service on snacks and continental breakfast items. We have found that even in some of the more stricter health departments, we are going to be able to utilize snacks and continental breakfast. And talking with some of these groups, they realize that it's safer for the students to be able to do this than to have to go to the convenience store, or to have to run to the grocery store, leave the house and come back in. But there's going to be some adjustments in service as well. For the most part, for all of these items, if you think about a snack item we talked about last night, puppy chow, for example, in the past, it's possible you make a fresh batch, you put it in a big serving bowl with a lid and tongs, and the students are able to come in and take a couple scoops, put it in their bag and go. The idea is that that type of service isn't available this fall, that everything needs to be individually pieced or individually portioned out for the students. So in that case, if there was a big batch of puppy chow made, maybe the staff is putting them in individual bags and tied up and set out on the counter, spaced apart appropriately so that the students can grab and go. The same goes for anything else. PB&J supplies, we know that that is a staple at 100% of our chapters across the country. In the past, maybe you've got a nice jar of peanut butter, and you've got a jar of jelly, and you've got some nice loaves of bread the students can choose from, and they dig through and they make their own. Well, that's just not going to be an option, or not, at least not a recommendation for this fall, that either those sandwiches would need to be made in advance and individually wrapped, or there would be 2 pieces of bread individually wrapped and an individual PC for peanut butter and an individual PC for jelly. But the idea is that you are minimizing the students touching food items and touching utensils that other students would then be touching. Each of these health departments has also recommended that there be what we mentioned earlier, the additional hand sanitizing stations and gloves for student use. We know that gloves in general, for those of you that haven't been in healthcare or probably in food service, it's not a normal thing to put on those really tight fitting gloves that the chefs love to use. There are cheaper options and options that you can probably get more buy-in from the members if you think about those big deli gloves that slide on and off real easy, and they're easy to use for these types of situations. So we definitely also recommend that you be having that thought process when it comes to your snack services. One other thought on snacks. If you've just come with a group, again, we haven't found this yet, that they say no snacks are available. We want everybody to think about the idea of snack bags that can be put together for each individual student on any given basis throughout the week. So whereas maybe they can come through normally pre-COVID and pick up 1 or 2 items each day, if it's in the service agreement to provide 1 or 2 items each day, maybe we put a bag together of 14 items that the student can pick through. There's Google Docs and there are other forms that you can use for that sign up, but I think that would be handy in a worst case scenario for you all.
Yep.
So before we go to the next slide here, just recommend that you think about your layout like this. You think about whether or not you can do the buffet services or your staff is going to be needing to serve plated from the kitchen, but have those conversations with your staff about what this flow looks like, where the students are going to be seating, where they're going to be entering and exiting. Okay, so as mentioned, we're going to let Liz talk on the finer details regarding laying out the seating, but we want to go back to this capacity discussion. I know that's probably a big concern for all of you. For this example, this would be one of our larger southern chapters that we feed, where this dining room is a little more than twice the size of the last one we were discussing. And when doing that 36 rule, we came up with a 69-person capacity recommendation. Now we have got a chapter that we usually expect about 200 members at every lunch and dinner at this chapter. So how can we feed these members safely and still give them all an opportunity to come to the chapter house? There are some cool tools that can indicate safe places to seat. We talked about the floor markings earlier that can be used for waiting in line. Those can be also used for indicating safe areas to seat. From the kitchen service side of things, we like the idea of placemats a little bit better than that. There are all kinds of options for you to consider. Again, we strongly recommend you be looking at those now. We're not seeing any major lead time delays on those, but things can change and we have that conversation with your team. There are the super affordable and easy disposable items, all the way up to the nicer vinyl items that you can have branded, that mesh more well with the aesthetics of the dining room, but there's all kinds of options for you to review. We like this idea, especially in the place that when there's a placemat there, the student can know it's safe to seat. One of our team was able to spend some time at the Mayo Clinic in Minneapolis area a couple of weeks ago, and they had a really cool idea where there was these laminated paper signs that had 2 sides to them, and one said, this area is safe to sit. The other side said, this area has not been cleaned and is not safe to sit. So that when students come through, they can manage that on their own. The kitchen staff, the house, anybody there can be a system for any of that, but it's a really cool way to indicate safe places for the students to sit. Okay, so back to the idea of getting everybody in to the chapter house. We want to talk a lot about the idea of these tiered meal times or these slotted meal times. So for this example, again, we have 200 members that are able to come in and eat on the meal plan. We've only got room for about 70. So doing some simple math, that means we got to have at least 3 meal seatings for the chapter members all to be able to come in and eat. How do we manage that? How do we make sure that we're not getting everybody all at once, that we're doing this the right way? And there are a couple ideas. We had one of our organizational partners say, Jack, can't we just have everybody sign up and before the year starts, they look at their schedule and they're able to say, hey, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays, I have got classes until noon, so I'm not going to be at lunch until 1 o'clock. And then on Wednesdays and Fridays, I can be there for the 11:30 a.m. lunch seating. So the answer is yes, you can do that up in advance. It's going to be a little bit more challenging for the students. They're going to be a little less satisfied, we think, because they're not going to have the ability to change that as much throughout the year. And if they do, it'll be a little more difficult. And as we started thinking about how can we keep this convenient, how can we still provide a really great experience for the members in this regard, I know some of our competitors have done the same thing, but we wanted the students to have the ability to sign up for these meal times on their app. So for this one, let's say we have a meal seating at 11 a.m. It'll go for 30 minutes. Then there would be a 15-minute cleanup window for the staff to come out and sanitize the tables, the tops of the chairs, drink stations, etc. Then there would be another seating at 11:45, or you could set it at noon. Another period of time for the students to eat, say 30 or 45 minutes. another cleanup window, and then let's say a final seating at 1, from 1 to 1:30 for those students that need to come in a little later. For those of the organizations maybe that don't have access to an app through a food service partner or a partner that doesn't have that, there's also an easy way to do that with Google Docs. And our team has been working hard on that for the last several weeks. So if any of you would like to see that, again, Megan will be submitting our contact information. Please feel free to reach out. We're happy to share ideas with anybody in the hope that we can all get through this thing together. But we strongly recommend those groups that do want members back at the house to be thinking about these tiered meal times. The same goes for the live out meals. From the get-go, we have wanted to say to all of our partners, we completely understand if an organization says, hey, we're going to avoid any live outs coming to the house because we just want to be as safe as possible. We completely get that. We respect it. We know it's a hard decision because we know how important these live out meals for the group are for these groups. But what we have wanted to say is don't make that decision because you think that food service providers can't accommodate, because we can, and we believe your chef staff should be able to as well. Through the same idea of signing up on the app or a Google Doc or even in advance, your food service should be able to provide live out meals as a curbside pickup option. And the reason we really like the app for this is that, you know, you don't want a student signing up for a pickup meal that the chef team might put out at the start of lunch at 11 a.m. If that student can't come back to the chapter house by 12:30, that could be the best food in the world, but if it's been sitting in that box for an hour and a half at room temperature, it's not going to be very good, right? So when you're talking about this option with your staff, please make sure that they have accommodations prepared to make sure that they're temp controlled and that they're done so in a safe way, in a way that the members are going to enjoy the meals. But live out meals, so this is a large Southern meal plan we talked about. Of those 200 members, 140 are live outs. We want them to feel as if they can come, grab and go, or come to the house. We want them to know that those options are still there. Scott and Megan did put a few indicators there. I think they might be more apt to go to this smaller screen here, Scott. I think it's fine. Actually, backtrack for me, Scott. I'm going to change my mind on you there. I just wanted to show real quick, this is a different style of service where this kitchen here on the left, you'll see there's a kind of a pass-through window where the staff doesn't have to be out in the dining room. So this is another really convenient way. We're going to be recommending to all partners where you have these large pass-through windows in the hot and cold lines that there be additional plexiglass either on the sides or on top, again, to limit the exposure between the students and the staff. Really important, not a lot of places are mandating that. University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, for example, is. So any of our Alabama partners, we want to make sure you all are aware of that. But it's definitely something to consider, again, for the hot and cold service and the dish windows. Okay, Scott. This service in this chapter house, it's a little different. This is a smaller service for us. We serve about 18 members at this chapter house. And when you do that 36 rule, you come up with the math of 13 people recommended capacity in here. In this setup, we are not going to have the hot and cold lines out in the dining room. There's just frankly not enough space. And to keep things safe, we're going to have the food set up in the kitchen with the staff. And as the members come through, the menus will be posted as they normally would with all of those options, salad bar included. They just simply tell the chef what they'd like, or they can fill out their request on the app in advance, and the chef will have that food ready. When it's done, they'll bring it out and they'll place it on the purple table there, the food service tables. Okay? The members will also have access to their chapter refrigerators for any of their own items. You'll see the recommended flow. What we really want to avoid is a lot of crossing paths here, especially again, as we've talked about, crossing paths and interaction between the staff and the students. Normally in this dining room, the blue table, the drink table, would be up there in that top part, but we wanted to move it away from the kitchen because as students are going to spend a lot of time in front of the drink station, we didn't want them there doing that while the staff is coming out of the kitchen door and placing food on that service table. So you'll see both the drink station and the bus stops set up on the opposite side. Again, not ideal in that the entry and exit are coming through the same doorway. It's a little bit better in that it's a bigger doorway as the students are able to come through. Shouldn't even call it a doorway, it's the pass through. We always do recommend the one entry, one exit, but we think this one's a pretty good way to be thinking about this. Now we want to talk a little bit about the idea of, we've called it our group think or the member assistance. The idea of, for those of you who don't have a bigger staff, maybe you've only got one chef in your house, it's going to be really difficult for that one chef to make all this fresh food, be on the line serving the fresh food, and also handle the cleaning and sanitizing between seatings or an appropriate amount of time. So for those of you in that situation, we recommend having communications with your members about them assisting with the safety and sanitation, whether or not it's wipes or the sprays and paper towels or rags, that it be policy for them to wipe up their area when they're finished eating before they go and they put their plate in the bus stub. We know it's not going to be an easy thing to have. We're certainly not pushing it to our partners, but there are going to be some situations where that's going to help you out and help you provide safe services without adding in a ton of costs, which I know we're all trying to avoid. So that's one of those things we talked about earlier. If you can communicate that earlier on, get that good buy-in from the members, we feel like you're going to have a lot more success with that.
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome.
After that, Scott, they are leaving the dining room, and I think that's where
Liz picks up. So,
yep.
Such great information, Jack. Thank you for that. Can you stick around for Q&A?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. We'll talk to you in a little bit then. So, well, we need to welcome in our friend Liz Toombs again. And Liz, thanks again for making time for us today. It's funny, we were sharing the story last night, but you shared in our planning call, part of this process is breaking your heart a little bit. So share a little bit about that, kind of share that story, and then kind of talk us through some of the things we need to be thinking about in terms of the common areas of the house.
Sure. So the part that breaks my heart is that I've built a career on maximizing spaces for people, specifically within these Greek chapter houses, always figuring out how we can use every corner of the space, get as many people in there as we can. And now we're having to pump the brakes on that concept and really back it up and minimize how many people we're putting in there, just thinking from a safety aspect. So it's just, I've trained myself one way, so I'm learning a new way of thinking so that we're able to still offer our skills to clients and help them navigate the world of COVID-19.
Yeah, it's pushed us all to be more creative, hasn't it?
Yes, yeah, it has. Yeah. So starting back in the dining room to pick up where Jack left off, I believe a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so I just am going to share with you some space plans that we have done for clients. This is something that you could easily do for your chapter houses, or someone could do that for your space if you don't already have these. So this is a dining room that pre-COVID was going to seat 144 students. The dining room tends to be a hub of the home, of the house, because people come in for chapter dinner and just all sorts of gathering happens in there. So obviously we can't really be seating 144 students in there anymore. So we revised the plan and came up with, based on that formula that Jack shared with you, the room square footage divided by 36, the new capacity is 59 people. You'll see we removed a number of the tables. You can actually see them lined up along the wall, and chairs stacked up and lined along the wall as well. This is where having a table that the top flips and the table on casters, it can just be rolled away and relatively flush with the wall, so it doesn't take up a lot of space. And stackable chairs really come in handy also, so that you can get all of that furniture out of the way. It's not eating up valuable floor space. We also took a moment, because if your dining room has more than one entry point, a possible good solution would be to designate one of those openings as the entry to the dining room and the other as the exit. You're seeing this tactic used a lot in restaurants and even in storefronts, just to minimize the amount of close interaction that people have to have when they're coming and going. So if you have multiple points of entry, that would be a great way to utilize them. If you don't, there's nothing you can do about it. And I think that that's okay as well. Also, something to think about is when you look at these tables, you'll know these are not 6 feet apart. In some instances, it's just not feasible to get a dining room set up and still have your people sitting 6 feet apart. But there are ways, the tables are spread out There's other things that you can do. Some of these houses are still being considered residences, like as if a family lived in them. And so it's just known that it's not a restaurant environment, that these people are going to be a little bit closer than 6 feet when they're seated to eat. So you've just got a few different factors that you'll want to consider there. Moving to the next example is a slightly smaller dining room. In this instance, we were seating 64 people prior to COVID, and now this organization has decided they are only going to have us set up the furniture for the number of students that live in the house. And that particular number happens to be 52. So you'll see it's not a ton of extra space, but it does give enough that there can still be some flow through the dining room and it works well. There's actually only one point of entry and exit on the interior of this house, and so we're just making that work in this particular situation. But same story, the furniture is just going to be lined up against the wall, so that way it's not a point of congregation for students and it's not a temptation to have to worry about for them. If you are lucky enough to have an outdoor space where students can dine, like this patio situation, I would encourage you to utilize that. This is a situation where, just like in restaurants, the open air patio dining is a little more comforting because you don't have to worry about being enclosed indoors. Patio furniture is also pretty wipeable. It's pretty easy to clean up. This is a pre-COVID layout, and so what we ended up doing was just lessening the number of tables and chairs for this client and spreading them out a little bit more so that they could utilize that space. You have to think the first few months of the semester in most areas of the country will be warmer weather, and so it will be comfortable for students to go outside and to dine. And so that just maximizes your capacity for being able to serve the students. If you happen to have an area that you could use for outdoor dining, but you don't have furniture, you may want to look into that. You may want to talk with your organization and see if that's something they can get a hold of for you, even if it's something as simple as a wooden picnic table or just inexpensive plastic tables and chairs. Again, those clean up really well. You don't have to worry about the weather beating them up, and it would offer you some additional capacity, because when you reduce the number of people that you can seat, then you obviously have to go into that mode of multiple seatings for lunch and for dinner, just like Jack was referring to. So that can be a little bit challenging depending on the number of students that you're trying to feed. And so just utilizing your outdoor space would be a creative way to maximize that for dining. When it comes to cleaning, I won't read you this whole slide here, but this was provided to me to share with you by Eustace Chair Company. They are a company that makes all of their hardwood furniture, chairs, and tables right here in upstate New York, and they put out this cleaning guide. So you can see it's just a relatively mild cleaning solution that they recommend for helping sanitize for COVID-19. And I actually spoke with a number of furniture manufacturers that we work with, education-based and commercial manufacturers, and they were all telling me the same thing, whether it was upholstery, laminate, or even case goods, hardwood pieces, but that a mild solution is going to be your best bet. You really need to watch using anything very harsh because it could eat away at the finish of a piece of furniture and end up damaging it and compromising its structure and just in its look as well. So like I said, I'm not going to walk through this, but if you would like to, you can screenshot it or you can pull it when Scott and CSL share the slides with you. But I did want to share that in case that was something that would help you. Keep in mind that most of the time, the recommendation is that those solutions stay on the surface for about 10 minutes. Again, we're talking in ideal situations today. I know that when you're turning over a dining room and you're trying to feed hungry students, you may not always have 10 minutes, but that would be the goal in a perfect world. But something is more likely better than nothing. Yep. And I would encourage you too to talk with your housekeeping staff because they understand the surfaces in the house and how to clean them well, and they would be a really good resource for you on that. So then talking about how to protect your dining room furniture, there's a few options here that I'm sharing. The first is a vinyl tablecloth. They're pretty inexpensive. You can get them all over, including Amazon, and they make it really easy to wipe down between meals. They dry quickly, and by putting a tablecloth like that on your dining table, then you don't have to worry about damaging the table surface. So that's a way you can get around having to worry about what chemicals and cleaners that you're putting on the furniture. If tablecloths aren't your gig, you can go more of the placemat route. Jack touched on that a little bit. The monogramming or branding, those placemats is a really nice touch if that's something your organization would like to look into. These that I have here, those pink placemats, are a brand called Chilliwich. And if you're not familiar with those, they're just a nice woven vinyl placemat. Again, they wipe up very easily. They stay clean. So if you're concerned at all about producing a lot of trash with disposable placemats, or maybe you don't have to seat that many students in your dining room, so you want to do a nicer, reusable type placemat, this would be something that I would say that would be worth considering. And then those chair covers. Do what?
Sorry, Liz, to interrupt. Did we want to stop and give everybody an opportunity to say the word Chilliwich? Sorry to interrupt.
It's a fun thing.
You're all right. You're okay. So then the chair cover that you see there, the Alpha and Omega chair cover, is something that I've recently stumbled upon, and I've been trying to figure out if it's something that could benefit folks during this or not. So I just thought I would share. But they're a stretchable, washable, and customizable chair cover. So it's something that easily slides over the chair, and it fits it snugly. And I know there's debate about, does the virus live on fabric? Does it not? I don't know. I'm not a health official. I'm just coming at it from a decorating standpoint and trying to help you get ideas to be safe from that angle. But so one thought was, the wooden chairs, the vinyl chairs, those all wipe down really easily. But if you did have a fabric Parsons chair or something that you were worried about constantly cleaning, especially between meal seatings, this is something that you could consider. That chair cover could go on for the first sitting, and you pull it off for the second one, and the chair underneath is clean, and then you just clean it afterwards. So maybe that's practical for your situation, maybe it's not, but it's just, again, kind of a unique way that you could consider utilizing that product. And then, as Jack mentioned, 6-foot markers on the floor are just a really good use for the space. And you can get creative with that, whether that's a tape in the color of the organization's brand, whether they're branded stickers. There's a lot of things that you can do in that area. It doesn't have to just be ugly masking tape on the floor. There's some ways to have fun with it if that's something that's going to become an everyday use that we have to look at. So moving away from the dining room, let's talk a little bit about living room spaces. So a lot of our clients are talking about hanging signage at the entry points to living rooms, TV rooms, those types of common areas. And what they're going to put on that sign is what the new capacity is. So they're using, again, that square footage calculation, and they're determining what is the safest maximum number of people to be seated in that space. And then it's up to the students to abide by that signage posting. Another option is to remove some furniture from the space. If you have somewhere else that you can store those items, then you can pluck some pieces out and kind of minimize what you have in there, spread those pieces out. You're seeing this in a lot of common spaces in public places, and that's something that could work if you have the space for it, whether it's storage in another part of the house, maybe it's renting a storage unit, but if it's possible, that's what some folks are doing. If it is not possible to remove furniture, then another option would be potentially to rope off furniture that you don't want to be used. It could be anything from velvet roping to those types of pull-out, it's not really rope, but like at airports, the way that they use to guide you through, those types of things, or even corded rope. A lot of chapters have these on hand for recruitment for different reasons anyway, just to help with the flow through the house. So if your chapter house happens to have that, this may be a good way to put that to use outside of just recruitment time. Then this is the part that genuinely hurts my heart. I'm not even kidding. Some people, again, because we're unclear about the virus and fabric, some chapter houses are choosing just to remove any unnecessary items that would be touched. So think of throw blankets, throw pillows, all the pretty things that we go in and we add for extra layers to make it feel like home. Maybe they're just not necessary right now. Maybe it brings an extra bit of peace of mind. And so those might be something that you want to consider pulling out of the rooms and just storing until it seems like it's a good idea to bring them back into the space. Another thing you can do specifically to protect the furniture in these spaces, like coffee tables, side tables, if you have a painted finish, something that's textured, or even just a wood finish, you may want to top those tables with glass. Some chapters do this anyway as a way to protect the furniture. Some have not done it, but it's also going to make it a lot easier when whoever is coming into the room and wiping down that surface, because if it's glass, it's relatively indestructible minus scratching it. And it's going to be a longer term investment. It's not just applicable for COVID-19. It works in the future so that if someone were to put a drink on the table or sit nail polish or whatever all the things are that go wrong in these rooms, that glass could be cleaned up more easily than a wood finish could. So consider maybe adding some glass pieces where needed.
Yeah, I think you just reminded me of the story Woody shared a couple of weeks ago, where in our chapter house, we literally cleaned everything with Pine Sol. And it did not matter what type of surface it was. We cleaned everything with Pine Sol. So especially for those of you who are supporting men's facilities, we want to really encourage you to take advantage of this this glass option that Liz is recommending here, because some of us don't know better. And that's all I'll say about that. We'll move on to the next slide, Liz.
Well, and I will make another point about the glass really quickly. Most of the time, we're not putting in glass-topped coffee tables and those types of things, but putting a piece of glass, tempered glass, on top of a wood piece is a different situation. They have non-skid little bumpers that are underneath that, so you don't have to worry about that safety component quite as much as if you had a glass-top dining or coffee table. So that's an important notation. All right, so on to another popularly used common area of the house, the bathrooms. I really wrote this list more from the perspective of a powder bathroom, like on a common, like the first floor places that people are gathering, but really the details also apply to your group bathrooms if that applies to your house. So again, signage on the door to prevent overcrowding would be smart. I know some chapters where they have a powder bathroom that may have 2 or 3 stalls in it, they are limiting it to one person at a time, and they're asking you to lock the door when you go in to use it. And then once you're finished, then you go back out, the next person can go in. In the group bathrooms, when you're thinking about getting ready at the showers, the makeup counters, the vanity sinks, those types of things, you may have to come up with a new capacity number, and maybe even have signups for shifts of when people are going to go in and shower. And using automated dispensers like for your soap and your paper towels are really helpful as well. Those Torque brand paper towel dispensers that tend to sit on the counter, and they're pretty attractive given that they're just auto dispensing paper towels. Those are really popular right now. We're putting those in a lot of chapter houses. And I even noted yesterday that up until the beginning of this month, a few of the colors, the finishes, had been sold out because they are that popular. And businesses and all types of organizations are using those for dispensing their towels right now.
All right, I'm excited about this next part because we talked a little bit about sleeping dorms and bedroom configurations in our move-in makeover session a couple of weeks ago. You've got some new ideas here to add to what we shared a couple of weeks ago, so I'm excited to hear this section of your session specifically. So fire away.
Yeah. So going back to the sleeping dorms, they obviously pose a unique challenge because we cannot sleep that many people in a space anymore. So we have, for several clients, come in and taken a number of the beds that were in the sleeping dorms, dispersed them into the day rooms, which we'll show you momentarily, and then figured out what the maximum number of beds is that we could put in the sleeping dorms. Now, this is a situation we did not use that square footage divided by 36. Instead, we just started laying out the size of the beds that was in the dorm, and then you can see on there in black, we have dimensioned the space between each bed. And this is useful for a couple of reasons. One, if you as the house director are having to direct the handyman or a moving company on how to arrange the furniture, this is going to be the guide, right? They have to set it up. You can go in there with the tape measure. They can go in there with the tape measure. Everything can be verified that it is set where it's supposed to be. And then secondly, it just really offers peace of mind for parents of students that are going to be living in the chapter house. They know that everything's being taken seriously, that there's some good distancing where possible, and this is just a visual way to exemplify that.
Yeah,
so then going on, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we talked a lot in Move-In Makeover, and I really want to reiterate this point, Liz just made it as well, that it's super important as we're working on those communication plans to our students and their families, that move-in day communication is really important, and to help them really be reminded that do not move anything. This is all where it is for a very specific reason. I think it's going to be constantly important for us to be reminding them of that message and that strategy.
Yep. So these are some examples of 2 different day rooms that we did after pulling beds out of the sleeping dorm. Again, the measurements are there. You'll notice in the photo on the right in that drawing, they're sleeping head to toe in that situation. And that is so that their heads aren't on the same end. And then if they were to roll over, you know, they're only 6 feet apart. And so then you don't have to worry about the breathing particles and that quite as much by sleeping head to toe there. Again, we're just trying to offer solutions so that everyone understands where the furniture should be placed, that it should stay there, and that you know, they are distanced as best as possible based on the situation.
Awesome.
Campus canopies is something that I wanted to bring up. It's something that came to my attention. And if you're not familiar, effectively they're a pipe and drape system that can go around these beds. And I looked into them a little bit more. They do meet flammability codes. So they are intended to be in dorm and Greek life situations. And what it is it's just set up and it provides a curtain that can go around, which creates a barrier for the person sleeping in the bed. It offers some privacy and just some separation from someone else that might be in the room. I would venture to say, after looking into it, if you could get a hold of a piping system, that it would be very easy to DIY it. You know, some PVC pipe, some fabric that meets flammability codes, and you could slide it on there, or parents of students could do that. I did hear from someone yesterday that a fire marshal in their area said no, it interferes with their sprinkler system. So it's definitely a case-by-case situation depending on the layout of the house, depending on what the authorities in your area are saying, but it is something to consider. It's similar to like when you get on an RV in a bunk bed and you just slide that curtain across, it creates that privacy and that barrier. But I thought it was a creative way that students could get a little bit more separation even when they're within a room with a roommate.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. Thank you, Liz. Appreciate all that. Stick around for Q&A, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So let's try to wrap up a few closing thoughts here, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. Both Liz and Jack mentioned signage on the floor, and I want to give you some examples of what that might look like. You think about, I know everybody, when you're walking through your chapter house, most of your students have their face stuck in their phone, so they're already looking down. So it's going to be important for us to have some colorful signage on the floor that catches their eye to constantly remind them of the social distancing guidelines that we're trying to incorporate now. These are all pretty boring, if I'm being honest. And Liz mentioned earlier, you can get creative with this. So whether that's a regional type of saying or some fun that you can poke at, or maybe if you can even incorporate how you might want to stay separated from your rivals down the street or in another city. These are all creative examples of how you can make signage a little more entertaining and a little bit more engaging. When we talk about engaging your students and helping them and making them part of the process, this is a really good opportunity to do so. I can't even begin to imagine some of the things that they might come up with to be printed on signage for your social distancing. So would encourage you to enlist their support and their creativity, because I think it could be hilarious and promote health and safety. I do want to share that it's funny. We initially we wondered, okay, there was like a huge PPE shortage right out of the gates, and we're thinking about, okay, there's a mask shortage, and I know there still is at the it's at the hospital level in the healthcare field, but for folks like you and me, you know, their masks are all over the place now. Um, it's pretty amazing how quickly every printing company and every t-shirt printing company in America suddenly started being a mask manufacturer. So every signage company in America now, or every printing company in America is now doing this kind of thing. So super easy to find a local provider or a local supplier that can print these up for you. So would encourage you to look into that and get a little creative. Unfortunately for some of the rope systems that Liz mentioned, it's a little bit more difficult to make those entertaining and engaging, but I want to offer up a couple examples. You see the velvet rope there, and you also see the pull-out version that Liz mentioned. And then she also mentioned campus canopies, and I want to give you guys a quick look at what that looks like. She mentioned it's kind of a pipe and drape system. Again, unless your name is Scott Fusell, you probably could DIY this. So a really good option here. Again, a case-by-case scenario. Check in with your fire marshal before you tell everybody this is what you should go do. So I think we talked about a move-in makeover, having to creating those dividers, especially in sleeping dorms, is really important to help with social distancing when we can't be 6 feet apart. But again, it always comes with that disclaimer: is get the fire marshals sign off on that before you start really implementing a lot of these solutions. So, but again, another great option, assuming the fire marshal gives it the thumbs up. So with that being said, Christina, I'm seeing a 19 on my notifications, a 20 on my notifications now, and I don't know if all those are questions or not. So I'm going to lean on you now to give us a quick heads up on what our Q&A situation looks like, and we're going to pepper Jack and Liz with questions for at least 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll send everybody off to enjoy their weekend. So what are you seeing out there, Christina?
Okay, so I think that most of our questions here have been answered by Jack and Liz throughout the chat. I do have a few questions though. Okay, so Bill has some concerns about how if the students are sitting across from each other at the dining table, is that really physically distanced enough?
Well,
Go ahead,
go
Liz.
ahead, Jack. Okay, so that's a situation where it kind of is case by case based on what's going on at your university, within your state, what people are saying. Because as I mentioned, some places are treating these as residential homes. So you and your family are going to sit around the dining table, and you're not going to have 6 feet apart, right? Because you're all living in the same space. In other instances, yes, you may be encouraged to spread them out to be 6 feet apart. It's just going to limit the capacity that much more. And then it may require more meal seatings, those types of things. So I would love to be able to give a perfect answer, but the info's changing daily, and all of the governing bodies are handling things a little bit differently. So I hope what I'm sharing makes sense. And I'm sorry that it can't be more definitive for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder, Liz. Everything is changing weekly, if not daily. And so would encourage you to stay on top of what is being recommended locally, because obviously what's happening in Indianapolis might be completely different than what Liz is experiencing in Lexington. So it's just really important that we continue to follow the guidance of our local officials and follow that and our university officials as much as we possibly can. So, because it is going to be very distant or very different in a case-by-case scenario. So,
Sure.
Christina, what else are you seeing?
Another option
Well, I think Steve
might be to alternate the chairs, stagger the chairs on either side so that you're not directly across, but once, I don't know how to do this on a webinar, but once slightly off center from the other, on the other side of the table, so that you don't
Yeah.
have a right face-to-face type interaction.
Yeah, definitely. That's another idea too.
All right, Christina, what else you seeing?
I think that should have, Marilyn, does that, you can shake your head yes or no, does that help?
I see a couple there, Christina, that I could touch on from the food service side.
Okay.
The spacing formula was, again, the square footage of your dining room divided by 36. So that should cover that. I saw Steve P ask a question about what is required for a mask to be effective. I think we could certainly defer you or refer you to the CDC website, but really anything is better than nothing. And we're going to be buying the double layered cloth masks that can be worn for any of our staff. The disposable ones are really effective. You want to try to avoid those once they're wet, they say. We've also had a lot of people ask about face shields, which have been approved in most health departments for kitchen staff. It'll be a little easier if you're going to be wearing something like that for 8-10 hours a day. So face shields is another option for your staff. Also saw Lori ask a question about thoughts about the fact being airborne. I think that was something that a lot of the food service providers, it was kind of like a blessing early on, was that it's never really, there's not been a lot of information showing that people are getting sick through food. This virus is transmitted as soon as you digest it. The chemicals in your digestive system are killing the virus, and it's not something that you get by digesting it. The same goes for touching. It sounds like it's more and more rare that you're getting this virus by touching the same pair of tongs and everything. I think that can still happen, they're saying. So they're still really recommending you be careful. We're following these best practices to avoid students doing their self-service. We have seen a couple public health departments say, like, okay, we don't need to be as worried about this with food. University of Wisconsin was one that said, hey, you all are residential. You can do these normal buffet style services like you always have. We're not too concerned about it in that regard. But we're still making the recommendation that you do follow all these best practices and recommendations from your own perspective, from a liability perspective. It just doesn't seem like anything you would want to risk at this point.
Yeah. I think that's great guidance, guys. Thank you, Jack.
I saw one more about food service on the ice machine, if you want me to go into that, Christina.
Yeah, I think that and the water fountains are a great point. Those have been big questions.
Yeah, water fountains is I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's one of those definite recommends. You shut it down. Unless it's one of those ones that's like a bottle fill up, those are different, right? But the one where you actually hover over it and you're breathing and you're taking in the water, that's like the worst possible scenario. We've talked to a couple public health departments that have staunchly recommended that you consider removing those traditional water fountains. For the ice machine that Leah had a question about, we see that one a lot right now. We think there's a way to use the scoopable ice machines, but again, it goes back to signage and following best practices. Whether or not students actually do, that's the other question. But yeah, we want to have up a lot of signage that indicates the correct way to use that machine. The student should be wearing a mask when they use it. The student should be wearing gloves. The scoop should be put into a sanitizing solution when done. There's a way to do that, but you really want to get the members on board before you do.
I will say I'll go back to the water fountain question, and that is that it is fairly easy to retrofit the bottle fillers onto water fountains so that if you can somehow block off the part where they would drink out of the water fountain itself, but the bottle fillers are easy to retrofit and they're automatic. They don't have to touch anything. It's a sensor. So I think that can be done, and typically a plumber should be able to install those for you. I know that Steve had another suggestion that he wanted to share, and then I think I've got one more question.
Great. Steve?
Yeah, no, so Liz, a quick question. I know that this week the CDC I think it's CDC, one of the regulatory agencies okayed Lysol for killing the COVID-19 virus. how does that affect fabrics and fabric surfaces related to all of this? I mean, does that give really, you can't clean it, right? So at least not every day, but certainly if we could spray Lysol on it, it would help, I think, potentially. I just wanted to see what your thoughts were related to that.
Sure. I tend to avoid directly spraying Lysol, like hardcore, onto a surface. I usually will do it in the air around it, let the particles fall on it. That way, it's kind of like perfume. When you spray something directly onto a fiber like that, it's going to end up deteriorating it more quickly, as opposed to just sort of blanketing the air and letting it touch things that way. Something I am seeing people do that make a lot of sense is fiber seal. I don't know if you have it in your area or not. It is a franchise type company, but they come in and they clean the upholstery just like a carpet cleaning company or someone else would do. And then they put a treatment on it that effectively makes any fabric become like a Krypton fabric. So what that does is it tends to keep things at the surface of the fabric so that they can be wiped away, vacuumed off, cleansed, whatever the case may be. Now, they're not making any sort of outright claims that this is protecting the virus from getting in there. It's just what their service is from like a dirt and just germ perspective, that it's not getting in there. So I know we're using that for a couple of clients just to help protect the furniture, because it's a fraction of the cost of replacing it. And again, it just kind of buys that peace of mind of you don't have to worry about things really soaking in there, especially when it's a high use area. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thanks.
Yeah.
Christina, did you say you had one more question?
Yes. So I wanted to go back to Marilyn Isaacson's question just about, they have round tables, Liz and Jack, and they're 5-foot tables. So her concern is just making sure that there's enough space between students, you know, to make sure that they can safely eat in the dining room.
Yeah. That's a tough one, right? Because you're just under that 6-foot marker there. Jack, do you have anything that comes to mind immediately?
No, you know, there's no magic answer to say we can create space, you know, on a 5-foot table, unfortunately. The creative solutions are going to be regarding whether or not those tables can be folded and stored, and you can bring in either the long rectangles, the bigger circles, or, you know, we had someone say, I think it was University of Alabama that said their ideal situation is the tiny tables. That's one person at a table. You're almost going back to like a school desk. So, you know, unfortunately, I don't think we can give a magic answer on those specific tables, but there are solutions in terms of buying other types of tables that can give you some more ideal seating in your space.
So something that just popped into my mind when you said that, Jack, is maybe if you, depending on the number of tables that you have, if you take those circles and you line them up side by side so they're all butted together. Obviously, they're not rectangular or square, so there's not going to be a straight line of them, but maybe if you put them in a row or put a couple together, then you could go back to that staggered seating that Steve Ratterman was referring to. And so then, yes, you may only have 5 feet directly across from someone, but if I don't have anybody here and the other person is over here staggered, then you can get a little bit more space between you. It's not a perfect solution, and I understand that, you know, you may kind of be rounding the table and having to squeeze in by the other table, but that could be something worth trying out depending on the size of your chairs and the number of your tables.
Yeah, that's a great call, Liz. And it's also a great kind of segue into our wrap up. So if there's any other questions, we'll stick on the phone a little bit later and answer them. But we did talk about early on, like sometimes there's a fine line and other times there's a chasm between what's ideal and what is reality for your chapter house. Liz just gave a really good example of how, you know, ideally we will have 6 feet between everybody, but the reality for that one particular chapter house is they've got 5-foot tables. So how do we get creative to create as ideal a situation as we can, knowing that, you know, what's exactly perfect is not an option for us. So so I don't want you to be discouraged if don't let perfect be your bar. Do the best you can with what you have, and work with your house corporation, your local house corporation, your national house corporation, and your staff to create the best environment you can possibly create, given the tools that you have at your disposal. So that's the first thing I would encourage you to do. And then secondly, and we talk about this every week, is engage your members, whether that's through your signage or getting them enlisted and the wipe down of the high touch areas, either throughout the house and between individual seatings, if you go to the tiered seating situation that Jack was describing. So, you know, we've got to have their buy-in. They've got to be part of the process. They've got to participate in their own rescue, as we like to say here. So I would encourage you again to please continue to engage your students, have them buy into the process, because people support what they help create. And that's the only way that that's one of the ways that we can maximize their willingness to meet these guidelines and to help us create a safe and healthy environment for our students, for our staff, for you, and for the alums and professors that come to our facility. So the last couple of things I'll hit on is, you know, when we're talking to local house corporations and national house corporations, we're really helping them try to understand that this is a multi-level investment. Some of the things we're recommending, you're going to have to invest a little money in, but these aren't just physical structure investments you're making. You're making investments into the health and safety of your members and the health and safety of your staff and your house director. So it's important that there's this is a much bigger deal than just buying a new chair or buying a cover or creating more space. We are investing in the facility, but we're also investing in those who call it home and who support it. So there's a multi-level investment here that is really important for us all to acknowledge. And the last thing I would share is, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, we talked about leadership, and we've got to encourage our members to care enough to lead, and to lead enough and to lead through caring. So if you'll remember, you think back on Brandon Cutler's comment a few weeks ago, he talked about, you know, 80% of normal is still a lot greater than 100% back with mom and dad. So again, we got to encourage our students to be a part of the process and to want to lead. We got to decide what we want the headline to be. When I'm thinking about you know, when the local television station shows up in front of the chapter house, does the report and the byline at the bottom of the screen, is it Beta Theta Pi has 500 student rager with no social distancing and no mask, or is it Beta Theta Pi Sigma Nu choose an organization is a really extraordinary partner of the university, and here's what they're doing to help create a safe and healthy environment on campus and in their facility? What do we want the headline to be? We get a chance right now to decide if we're going to lead or if we're going to follow, if we're going to be part of the problem or if we're going to be part of the solution. So I appreciate you guys and your willingness to invest in a situation like this, in a session like this, because by doing so, you're showing us that you want to be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem. You're showing us that you want to lead, you want to help your students lead. So for that, we are really, really grateful. With that being said, I do want to give you a quick heads up on a couple of upcoming sessions that are going to be game changers. We're super excited. We never have enough time for all the questions and answers that we get. So we're going to have a opening readiness town hall coming up on the 24th. That's a couple of Fridays from now. And we're going to actually do that session with all of the folks that usually join us, from a volunteer perspective and our campus professionals and our National House Corporation professionals. They're all going to join us for this opening readiness town hall that we're going to have on the 24th. We've got a really wonderful panel that's going to be sharing with you. Cassie Gerhardt, who is the fraternity sorority advisor at University of North Dakota, and she's also the outgoing president of Alpha Chi Omega's House Corporation. She's going to be with us. Libby Anderson, who is the executive director and CEO of Zeta Beta Tau, will be with us. Jeff Rundle, who is the CEO at Beta Theta Pi, is going to be with us. And Adam Guy, who is the owner and CEO at Upper Crust, will be with us as well. So we've got a really wonderful panel that's going to be here to share their perspectives, what they're seeing out in the field, and they're going to be available to answer your questions. So it's a really wonderful panel really knowledgeable that, and we're eager to share them with you. So I'll be putting out a couple of posts on the House Directors Facebook group and asking for, hey, what are the things that you want to hear from this panel? Because we would love to give them some opportunities to think about what's on your mind before we get into that session. So be looking for those posts, and please engage and help us create a really wonderful conversation on the 24th. And then coming up on the 6th of August, and this one's going to be, this is going to be another joint session with our volunteers and campus professionals and National House Corporation professionals. We're going to do this on the 6th at 8 p.m. We're going to have one of my favorite people on the planet. She's sort of become a household name in the fraternity sorority community. Lindsay Picardo is going to be leading a session for us called A Whole New World, talking about, hey, here are the students that are coming back to campus. How do we lead them into this new normal? How do we lead them into this whole new world that they are now finding themselves a part of? So if you've not seen Lindsay speak before, if you've not seen her present and facilitate, she is a game changer. She is incredible at what she does, and we are super excited to have her as part of our team on the 6th of August. So please mark your calendar for those two sessions. We know that you will love both of them dearly. So with all that said, I do want to say thank you again to Jack and to Liz for sharing with us today. So grateful for your time, for your friendship, for your partnership, and the expertise you shared with our audience today. Thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to everybody who joined the call. If there's anything we can do along the way, whether you're a CSL client or not, we need you to know we are here to offer solutions and ideas to help you prepare for this fall. Do not hesitate to pick up the phone or shoot a quick email. We're here to help. Again, we are all in this together. We got to help each other. So if we can help along the way, please reach out to us via email or phone. We're here to help. Again, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for everything that you're doing. And we will see you on the next episode of House and Home. Have a great weekend, everybody.